Okay, so last week you told me about your recent Panera experience.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a restaurant experience to share with you as well that I found to be shocking, and then also led me to do a little bit more research in the spirit of our chain restaurant episode because I was curious about origins and whatnot.
Tell me.
So this weekend, we took Richard's niece out for her birthday because we couldn't make it to her party. And so we offered to take her out to eat and let her pick the restaurant. And she picked, I guess with the help of her mom, picked Texas Roadhouse. And I don't know if you've ever been to a Texas Roadhouse. If I have been, it's been so long, I didn't remember it at all. Like I was probably a kid.
That's like the one that has like the peanuts and the peanut shells like everywhere, or at least it used to.
Yes, it used to. They don't do that anymore. Peanut allergies and all that. They don't risk it. And probably also just the cleaning up factor.
Yeah, it was like the cleanliness.
Right?
Peanut shells everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the last time I probably was at a Texas Roadhouse, I was pretty young. I don't really remember anything about it. And when she picked that, I was kind of like, ugh, chain restaurant. Like, I don't know how this is going to be. Because, you know, it's a steakhouse, right? For anyone who hasn't been, it's a casual dining steakhouse. So not a fancy steakhouse. It's, you know, decorated like it's supposed to be in Texas or whatever. And like you said, peanuts on the table. And they have steaks. But I in my mind, I had very low expectations. Because I'm like, I don't know about this getting a steak at a casual dining establishment. I have Applebee's, Chili's in my mind, whatever, you know, okay, it's probably going to be underwhelming, but that's fine. I'm sure I can find something. Okay, so we go, we eat. Richard got a steak, and it was one of the best steaks he's had at a restaurant.
Wow.
And I was shocked. And like, we do some fancy steakhouse meals like for special occasions and stuff, and he said, you know, maybe not quite that caliber, he said, but right below it. But like the cut of meat, he got a New York strip, the cut was really nice, the cook was perfect, he said it was seasoned well, it was like one of the best steaks he's had.
Wow.
And I was shocked. I got a country fried steak. So, you know, they just take steak and fry it up, put gravy on it. Can't go wrong. Gravy. Anything with gravy will be good. Yeah. And it was also very good. I will say, like, side dishes and stuff, probably like more like average to above average. But like the steak itself, very impressive. So we were both talking about it on the way home. We were like, maybe we should consider going back to Texas Roadhouse if we're in the mood for steak, but not in the mood to spend like $300 at fancy Ruth's Chris. Yeah, so I was very impressed. And then, of course, that made me wonder, well, what is Texas Roadhouse and where did it start?
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, it started in Indiana.
Really? I mean, I guess I'm not shocked. So many chains are like Indiana origins.
I know, right? But this was more southern Indiana across the river from Louisville. So the guy who founded it, W. Kent Taylor, he was from Louisville, but lived in Colorado for a while and worked at nightclubs and restaurants there. And in the 1990, he came back. He was a Kentucky Fried Chicken manager, which also kind of made me laugh because we talked so much about KFC last time. But he wanted to open a Colorado-themed restaurant. So he originally opened something called Buckhead Mountain Grill with an investor. Long story short, he ended up leaving Buckhead and then decided that instead he would open up a Texas-themed restaurant and opened Texas Roadhouse in 1993 in Clarksville, Indiana. But since then, it's been not only successful in expanding and whatnot, but so as of 2023, Texas Roadhouse is the fastest growing restaurant brand in the world.
What?
Yes. And it says the 2024 Technomic Top 500 Chain Restaurant Report found that sales for Texas Roadhouse grew more than 15% in both 22 and 23, even though a lot of casual dining restaurants declined during that time.
I was going to say, I thought millennials were killing the chain restaurant.
Yes, I know, right? Well, not Texas Roadhouse, because apparently it's really good. And so, yeah. And so then, of course, I also had to look at whether it was a franchise or corporate owned. It is a franchise. They also have corporate owned restaurants. And recently, they have started buying back some of the franchise locations and converting them to corporate because their corporate locations have been performing the best. So they're buying out franchisees. They basically managing them corporately, and apparently whatever they're doing is working because they're growing like crazy and are very successful right now.
That's fascinating. I would never have guessed.
Yeah, me either. So,
although to be honest, I probably just haven't gone to a Texas Roadhouse in forever because I doubt that there's really any vegetarian food there.
I was going to say, you are not their target demographic as a vegetarian. That is for sure. It is very steak focused, as you can imagine, for a steakhouse.
I wouldn't have guessed that it was growing that much.
Would not. I was shocked. Because, like I said, after we went, and I kind of went in with just low expectations, and I walked out and I was like, that was a really good meal for a pretty moderate price. I mean, it's steak. So some of the plates were more in like the $25 to $30 range for, the larger steak cuts. But so there were 3 of us. We all got steak. It came with 2 sides and we got dessert, and we spent a little over $100.
Wow.
So I was like, yeah. And I think that's the other reason that well, that's what I'm saying. I think that's the other reason I kind of went in with low expectations, and I was like, how good can a cheap steak be? But they are doing a good job. But yeah, we talked about it the whole way home. We were both like just in shock that we were pleased with our chain restaurant meal at Texas Roadhouse. So yeah, and apparently they're wildly successful, and I had no idea.
Wow. Fascinating.
Right? So there you go. There's your hot tip. If you're not a vegetarian, you might want to give Texas Roadhouse a try.
All right.
And there's your chain restaurant update. We also got an appetizer of fried pickles, and they were delicious as well. So
I had fried pickles over the weekend too, but they were pickle spears.
I love a freaking fried pickle spear.
Really? I was going to say the opposite. In my hierarchy of fried pickle, spear's the lowest.
Oh, because ours were like little thin pickle chips, which are good too. But
I prefer the round chips.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. The round chips are elite.
Yeah, I really love a spear. I love like more pickle than I don't know.
Oh, okay. A fried spear to me is like it's too big. I don't know.
Yeah, too much pickle.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it depends, but that's funny that we both had fried pickles and we each had the style that the other prefers. Yeah. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
We're 2 long-distance best friends with a passion for learning about all the things that make everyday life interesting.
With my PhD in geography
and my master's in library science,
doing deep dives on topics is our idea of a fun time together. We'll share our findings with you on
Researching the Obvious.
So when we were in college in New Hampshire, I don't remember having Texas Roadhouse, but we had 99.
I do. I had never seen a 99 before until we went to college.
Yeah, but I felt like 99 was like the same thing with like the peanuts and the...
Yes, yep.
And it was like over by the mall. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, and so I remember eating there a couple of times in college, but the place that I know for sure that we went probably the most off campus, like away from school, right, yes, would have been, I'm pretty sure, Red Hook Brewery.
Yeah, for sure. That was the deal. The weekend activity for poor college students with a car.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, obviously we ate at a lot of restaurants that were like campus adjacent, so I feel like that doesn't count. But if we ventured away from campus, it was usually to go to Red Hook Brewery.
Yes, because we would always take the tour. And how much was the tour?
$2.
$2.
$2. to take the tour.
For a brewery tour.
Yes.
And you got a free tasting glass at the end that came with the tour.
Right. They gave you the tasting glass that you could take home. And the best part is that Red Hook at the time had like their flagship beers, and then they always had a seasonal. So it was like four beers basically that were their like standards essentially. And so at the end of the tour, they would let you taste all four. But the way that they would do it is they would just fill up a whole pitcher of each beer. And so if you went on a tour and there were, 12 people on the tour, then the 12 of you could share the pitcher. But if you went on a tour and there were 4 people on the tour, then the 4 of you got to share.
4 of you sold them. Yes.
So it was like same amount of beer, regardless of the number of people on a tour.
Yes. I remember that.
Yep.
And we went so many times. And I remember we would go sometimes we'd go on random times. Like, let's say we didn't have classes on Friday or something. We'd be like, let's go to the first tour on Friday at like 1
we had
p.m.
to crack the code. Yes. Exactly. You
no one else is there
to find the tour that the least number of people were going to be on, so that you could drink the most amount of beer for only $2.
$2, yes.
$2.
And we had such a collection of those tasting glasses,
oh my God.
Too. In fact, I still have
some.
2. I think a lot of them broke, but
I was going to say, I still think I have like 3 or 4 of them, for sure.
And it was like the same tour guide every time, too. I think he totally recognized us.
Oh, 100%.
He's like, oh, you guys again.
We were not the only people doing this, though. Because I know for a fact that he recognized other people that also would go on the tour.
Yes. It was a very popular activity for us college students. And like you said, for $2, a good amount of beer. And then afterwards, you could sit and hang out in the restaurant, and we would like order food and stuff and like a full
and they had
beer. But
delicious nachos. Like,
oh yeah, the nachos. I remember
so
those.
Good.
We got those almost every time, I think.
Yeah, because they were delicious.
Yeah. Yep. So I feel like we were pretty lucky too to have Red Hook as a craft brewery so close to our campus.
Yes. Well, and what I was going to say too is this would have been 2007-ish. And that was definitely before all the breweries and stuff that we have now existed.
Right. The boom. The craft beer boom.
Yeah. They were it was early on the scene, because I feel like even in college, if we weren't going to Red Hook, if we were just going to go buy craft beer, there wasn't like a ton of options. You could get Sam Adams. You could get Harpoon, because we were near Boston, so Harpoon was easily available. That blueberry beer from Maine. I feel like, what I'm talking, was it Sea Dog or whatever? Yeah. And Red Hook, and I don't really know what other craft beer there was.
Yeah. Though to be fair, I think until we started doing the brewery tour at Red Hook, I was not much of a beer drinker. Anyway. And then I think that kind of introduced me to the fact that there were options other than Keystone Light, which is what was at every party that we ever went to.
Fair point. Yeah, I think I was a little bit lucky, because like I just grew up with it in my family. Like I had an uncle that homebrewed, and people were in my family drinking craft beer from, the 90s and even earlier. So it wasn't like totally foreign to me, I guess.
Yeah. Red Hook was really my intro to that.
I looked up for this episode today about craft beers. I looked up some definitions of different types of breweries, because now it's like pretty specific, like what constitutes a craft beer versus a not craft beer, what constitutes a microbrewery versus, a nano brewery versus a regional brewery. Like there's all these different levels these days that didn't exist actually back when we were in college even. Like the craft beer industry has grown very recently and very rapidly, and a lot of the definitions have also happened very recently as well. But a craft brewery specifically is a small independent brewery that has a production size of 6 million barrels of beer or less, which you might be like, wow, 6 million, that's a lot, but it's really not at all. And they have to be independent. And what that means is that less than 25% of the brewery is owned by a beverage alcohol industry member that is not itself a craft brewer. So, yeah, like you basically have to be like your own entity to be considered
like
craft beer.
Not owned by Anheuser-Busch, but you're still making your own beer kind of thing.
Right. There could be like it says, like less than 25%. So a larger company could have like 15% stake or something in a place. Maybe they offered seed money or something like that. But really it's the majority, 3/4 or more of the business is independent completely, versus I guess a regular brewery, a macro brewery. This is the one that probably most people are familiar with beer. So this has any brewery producing over 15,000 barrels a year, which is obviously a lot less than the 6 million, but it's still over 15,000 barrels a year, and also can be publicly traded and owned by like a large beverage company or something like this, right? So you could still be producing a small amount of beer under your label, but your label might be majority owned by AB InBev, and then you're not a craft beer anymore.
Okay. So it's less about the volume of beer and more about how it's owned and operated, or the size of the
it's definitely a combo, right? So it's definitely, because it still matters that it has to be less than 6 million barrels. Right? But then also that it has to be independently owned, and that's considered craft. Yeah.
But macro can be anything over 15,000
not independently owned.
Okay. Interesting. Right. I would not have guessed that.
Yeah. So I think like what's interesting is there's a lot of what people might consider to be like small label beers, but they're part of a big portfolio that's like Anheuser-Busch or you know, Miller Coors or something like that. And
they're not craft.
They're not craft because they're part of this like larger beverage portfolio.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then there's a lot of other definitions too. There's that are more characteristic by size. If you dig into craft breweries specifically, so there's microbreweries, which is a facility that manufactures less than 15,000 barrels of beer and sells at least 75% of their beer off-site. Oh. So I tried to look up some examples of what would constitute a microbrewery, and it was actually hard to find because 15,000 barrels is not a lot. So if you're making less than 15,000, it was just hard to find what brewery would be. The one I did find is actually the one right by my house, Union Craft Brewing.
Okay. They do like, less than 15,000?
They're just under that threshold. They do about 13,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but that's what I mean. Like, it's kind of hard to find ones. Like, I looked up some that I knew of from Indiana, like Three Floyds and Sun King and whatever, and they're all way over. It's pretty hard to find a brewery. I think you really have to know labels in a specific area where you live, because 15,000 is pretty small amounts. And then there's even what are called nano breweries today, which those basically are really small on-site breweries that produce less than 2,000 barrels a year.
Wow, that's really tiny.
Yeah. So I mean, like, again, the brewery by my house, like Waverly, is probably they're like going to be your really small neighborhood brewery that they're probably not distributing, or if they are distributing, it's maybe some kegs to a few local restaurants. And then other craft breweries that people are probably familiar with, there's a term called regional breweries. And these are breweries that are sort of that in between. They produce between 15,000 and 6 million barrels. So they're still falling under that craft brewery label, but they're larger than a microbrewery. And they're producing, you know, for both on-site and off-site consumption. And people are probably familiar with these ones. Sierra Nevada is still considered a regional brewery, like Bell's Brewery, New Belgium, Stone.
What about Sam Adams? Are they considered craft?
So Sam Adams is one of the reasons why a lot of these different definitions have existed, because they kept growing and growing and growing. And so they kept pushing the number of what was considered to be craft. But I just looked it up, and Sam Adams is now over the 6 million barrels a year threshold, only by a little bit. They're like at 7.5 million barrels. But yeah, they're like one of the reasons why it goes up to 6 million, because they kept like pushing that boundary of what was considered craft.
Yeah, because I remember, I mean, when we were in college, Sam Adams was referred to as a craft brewery, right?
Oh, for sure. Yes. 100%. Yeah. And it's only been recent that, like I said, like that they're over 6 million. So for comparison purposes, right? Like Sam Adams, like, yeah, maybe they now are outside of this 6 million definition. But for comparison, if we look at something like Budweiser, according to Anheuser-Busch InBev, Budweiser produces 106.2 million barrels of beer annually.
Wow.
Right. So like, yeah, Sam Adams is crazy in that they're now producing like 7.5 million. But Budweiser is producing 106.
Yeah, that's a huge gap. That's like way bigger than I guess I don't even know what I was thinking and what a barrel is and actual volumes. But yeah, okay. That's a huge gap.
Yeah. So Sam Adams has been pushing that definition. And especially if you're like a nano brewery or a microbrewery, you might be a little bit annoyed at the size of some of these craft breweries, like in comparison to you, if you're just producing like 6,000 barrels a year or whatever. But Budweiser, it's not even close. You know, these like macro breweries aren't even remotely, you know what I mean? Like they're just explosive. And then the other type of brewery that does exist that listeners might be familiar with are contract breweries. And so these are breweries that produce beer on behalf of another brewery operation in order to expand capacity. And you could be your own independent brewery, but then also have like tanks and stuff that you're using to produce someone else's beer in addition to your own. I know Genesee Brewery in Rochester, New York, like obviously they make Genesee beer, but they also are a contract brewer. So they'll make like Sam Adams and they'll make Labatt, Labatt Blue and like other beer. Or even like a smaller operation. There's a small brewery by my house, Peabody Heights, that they also do contract stuff for some smaller breweries that want to be able to like can things and stuff like that. But like I was saying, breweries, like the craft beer specifically, that explosion has been really recent. I was looking up some stats, and as recently as 1983, we hit a low point in the number of active breweries in the United States. And in 1983, there were only 80 breweries in the United States.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is low, because I feel like Michigan has like twice that number now.
Yeah, just one state,
even
right?
More.
So that was, 10 years ago. No, just kidding. 1980.
Yeah, that's not as old as us at all.
Yeah, right? So we're talking, 43 years ago? Yeah. There were only 80 breweries in the whole U.S.
Yeah, that's not a lot.
Yeah. So that was like our low point for the U.S. was 1983. Obviously, Prohibition had a huge impact on the brewing industry in the United States. So I only wanted to look at craft brewing in the US because we just have such a different history of breweries in the United States than like places like Belgium or Germany that have been literally brewing for centuries. But in the US, breweries started getting open basically as soon as people moved here from Europe because water was not safe to drink. So, the Puritans are moving over to the US and immediately starting breweries so that people had something to drink that was safe. So breweries started growing ever since colonists started coming to the US. And by 1873 is when the US sort of peaked for the first time in number of breweries that existed. And there was 4,131 breweries in the US in 1873, which is quite a lot, like over 4,000
compared
breweries.
To 80?
80?
Yeah.
I know.
That's
what I'm saying. So yeah, we had this peak in 1873, and then 100 years later, complete downfall. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, we peaked in 1873, and then the temperance movement started in the late 1800s, like during the Gilded Age. And then after the temperance movement started, then you had Prohibition. And so basically all of these breweries like legally could no longer manufacture beer. So the ones that did manage to survive during Prohibition were basically larger ones that were able to shift their operations to other things. So like Yingling, for example, they made ice cream during Prohibition.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically there already was this like decline happening because of the growing temperance movement. And then by the time Prohibition was passed in 1919, there were actually only about 1,000 breweries left in the US anyway at that point in time. So it's like even from 1873, we had 4,000 breweries to 1919, we only had 1,000 left. And then Prohibition happened. And so basically, unless you were a big company that had, you know, a lot of real estate or something like that, you just died because you couldn't produce what you were producing. Yeah. And so then we just had none, essentially. And then what's crazy is then after Prohibition, drinking culture changed dramatically because the drinking that was happening during Prohibition was basically cocktails because it was a lot easier to illegally produce grain alcohol and things like this. And so during Prohibition, people could pretty much only get spirits like moonshine and stuff. That was like the only thing they could really get. Like people weren't taking the time to brew beer illegally. They were just making moonshine and then making cocktails. So that sort of like speakeasy culture gave rise to cocktail culture. And so after Prohibition, when people were starting to consume alcohol again in the US, beer culture was essentially dead and people were only drinking cocktails.
That makes sense of why then into like the 30s, 40s, 50s. Because like I think of those eras as being like the martini, the Manhattan, the you know cocktail before dinner, cocktail like hour, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say about Mad Men too. Actually, is the scene where they're trying to
market Heineken
beer again.
Yes.
And then they do and then they do the Miller Lite beer too to be like, oh, it's a light beer, right?
Yes. Yep, that's right.
Because after Prohibition in 1941, there was 857 breweries. So that was the second peak, I guess, if you want to call it, which is barely a peak. Like we're at 4,000, then we're down to 1,000, then Prohibition, we're down to 0. Then we peak again in 1941 with 857 breweries, right? And then basically after 1941, because beer culture was just dead, basically all these breweries started to close and consolidate again and just went back down. And so by 1979, there were only 89 breweries in the US. And then, like I said before, 1983, there were 80. So per capita beer consumption didn't reach pre-prohibition levels of beer consumption until 1970. So people just like weren't drinking beer at all. So you can imagine this scene in like the 60s and 70s and 80s where like the only beer that exists in the US is basically light beer. It's Budweiser and Miller and Coors and Busch. That's what the beer industry was. It was 80 breweries that were basically producing the same sort of light or semi-light beer style. So craft beer was really just non-existent. So where does craft beer start? A lot of people in the industry point to 1965, Maytag, yes, the washing machine company.
Okay. Tell me more.
They buy a stake in Anchor Brewing, RIP. And the owner then created a new recipe for Anchor Brewing for their Anchor Steam beer. And that was like a big turning point in the industry, is because they created a new beer that wasn't a light beer or trying to be a light beer or trying to be in this like style. So that was 1965. And then in 1976, guy Jack McAuliffe, he debuted Sonoma, California's short but influential New Albion Brewing Company, which was widely considered to be the country's first microbrewery in 1976. And then in 1979, Jimmy Carter was president, and he passed a law that legalized home brewing.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy Carter.
Right. But that made a huge difference, because now people could experiment with beer at home. And so what happens is there started to be a growth in homebrew stores so that people could get brewing ingredients. And a homebrew shop owner, Ken Grossman, in 1980 opened up Sierra Nevada Brewing Company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So in Chico, California, Ken Grossman, he creates this brewery that's cobbled together from dairy tanks and other like defunct brewing equipment, and makes Sierra Nevada Brewing. He already had access to a lot of the ingredients because he was a homebrew store owner after that law got passed in 1979. And then in 1981, a year later, Starbucks co-founder Gordon Bacher co-founded Red Hook Ale.
There's Red Hook.
Yep, inside a Seattle transmission shop. Yeah, so we have basically 1976 is what considered to be the first microbrewery, New Albion. And then 1979, that homebrew law gets created. And then 1980, Sierra Nevada starts. And 1981, Red Hook Brewing starts. And those are really sort of pointed to as like the first instances of the growth of craft beer. And then in 1984 is when Jim Koch founded the Boston Beer Company, which is Sam Adams. So yeah, like we're talking like in the 80s is when we got Red Hook and when we got Sam Adams, which by the time you and I are in college were established, but still kind of the only ones that we really had in New England anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, so it's been very rapid, this growth. I have some charts that I can share online because it is pretty crazy, the context of this craft beer growth. So by 1990, so we're talking like all these breweries started in the 80s, right? By 1990, there was still less than 500 breweries in the US. And then we sort of saw a little bit of an increase and a rise during the 90s. And so in 1999, there was this small peak that ended up getting sort of affected a little bit by the .com crash. So we had another small peak that happened in 1999 where there were just under 2,000 breweries in the US. So 1,991.
That's pretty good considering there were 80 in 1983.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So like, you know, pretty substantial growth, right? Then it kind of like downturned a little bit because of the .com bubble. And then basically starting around 2010, there were 1,800. So it did go down a little bit from that peak in 1999. So there were 1,800. But then after 2010, you saw exponential explosion, essentially. So after 2010, it just went up and up and up and up. And today, it's crazy. So 5 years later is when we went over the pre-prohibition peak. And so there were 4,300 by 2015.
Whoa.
Yeah. So literally 5 years later, we go from 1,800 to 4,300. So we peaked past our pre-prohibition number of 4,100. And then today, there's over 9,500 breweries in the US.
Wow. So almost doubled then since that initial peak.
Yeah. So we're at 1,800 in 2010, at 4,300 in 2015, and then today, 2025, we're at 9,500.
That's impressive. That's an impressive amount of growth.
So it's been a crazy rapid growth, but also crazy recent growth the last 10 years. And realistically speaking, in 40 years, we have like 10,000 breweries. Hey, Katie, remember that time that we wanted to start a podcast based on all of our random research conversations?
Yeah, and we had no idea what we were doing or how we would even make a podcast.
Yeah, that's the time. It was a really good thing we found Podbean, because that made it super easy to upload all of our episodes to multiple streaming platforms.
Podbean is a really simple platform for hosting and publishing your podcast.
So, if you and your best friend are having random conversations that you think should be a podcast, check out Podbean.
And if you do, use our link to get a month free. Podbean.com/obvious. That's PODBEAN.com/obvious.
And become super cool podcasters like us.
World famous.
So these 10,000 breweries basically are all each producing less than 6 million and probably more like less than 15,000. Right. They're probably more in the like nano size. And craft beer, despite this growth, only constitutes 3% of total US beer consumption.
Yeah. That's such a small share of the market.
It's so small.
Like, tiny.
Yeah. What's crazy though is 80% of legal drinkers live within 10 miles of a brewery.
Just goes to show you how many there are. Wow.
And more people are drinking craft beer than before, even though it's very small. In 2013, about 6.5% of drinking age adults said that they consumed craft beer in the past 30 days versus today, almost 10% of legal drinking age adults said that they've consumed craft beer in the past 30 days. So it is still small, but it is growing in percentage. You know, I'm probably just living in this biased bubble, I guess, because to me, like only 10% of adults have consumed a craft beer in the last 30 days is like wild to me. But
that's because the circles you run in are craft beer circles.
I know, like this is the problem, right? Like I just live next to like 5 breweries, so like so yeah, it's been like very rapid and very recent, but that doesn't mean it's not without its challenges. And a lot of people today are wondering if we've reached this saturation point because, you know, 10,000 breweries.
Right, that's quite a lot.
And so 2024 was actually the first year where we did see more breweries close than open. And a lot of people, like I said, are pointing, are we at a saturation point? But realistically, experts are saying that it's more than that. Expenses are growing quite a bit, partially due to tariffs because we don't grow a lot of the hops and barley that are used for producing beer in the US. So a lot of those are imported. So the price has just gone up, just like coffee, because of tariffs. Also, aluminum and steel have large tariffs. So a lot of breweries are like, we can't afford cans because of that tariff. So they are saying that because of expenses, it's pushing out some people who maybe opened a brewery for fun and like weren't as serious, you know. So if the prices are just driving them out. But they are seeing breweries lean into other things like cider, which basically is a domestic product because we produce a ton of apples in the US, so you can produce cider pretty cheaply. And then also like the growth of the seltzer industry and breweries producing seltzers. And so what's interesting is that while we are seeing some decline, there are some places that are actually doing better. So small nano breweries and brew pubs that produce under 1,000 barrels a year are faring better overall compared to regional breweries. So we do see that like the smaller nano breweries and like local breweries are actually performing better year over year, whereas the regional breweries, those are the ones that are seeing declines. But they're not the only ones seeing declines. So beer and spirits as a whole actually declined about 4.2% from 2024. So people are just drinking less, like 4.2% people are drinking less. But honestly, wine is the thing that is the worst. Wine has declined 7.7%.
You know, that doesn't surprise me because I feel like the wine industry, to me, is a little bit less accessible. I just feel like they've catered to a highbrow kind of market. Yes. It's not the cheapest. And the cheap ones are not very good. Like, they don't taste very good if they're cheap. And then I feel like there's this whole like atmosphere that wine creates that feels exclusive.
Literally this morning, I saw a post on Threads that was like, I want a wine bar, but with the atmosphere of a dive bar. And I was like, I feel that because wine bars, for whatever reason, have to be like upscale and fancy. Why can't you just go and drink some nice wine somewhere?
And chill out like you would at a brewery.
Right. Exactly.
Yep. Agreed.
I feel like you see a lot of headlines that are very like dire for craft breweries, but I actually don't think that the craft brewery industry is in that much of dire straits, quite frankly.
Yeah, as a whole.
As a whole, it doesn't seem that way. Like, yeah, okay, some closed last year, but like we have almost 10,000 breweries in the US. Yeah. But there's also different changes in taste too. Like I said, I know breweries around me have started to do seltzers and also have started to offer NA stuff too.
Right, which is my topic today, because I was just going to say, I think it's very plausible too that some of that decline in alcohol sales and breweries is a trend that's being seen with younger generations drinking a little bit less, and also just people in general selecting some NA or non-alcoholic options. So I was really interested to find out more about this because this year I decided to give up alcohol. I did dry January, and then I was feeling so good after dry January. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to stick with it. And as I did find that I was missing my beer. I've always loved craft beer in particular since college, since we started going to Red Hook. And I've always enjoyed trying the different styles and different flavors. And so I started kind of poking around in the NA world. And lucky for me, that world is really starting to take off. And there are a lot of options available in the non-alcoholic beer space. So I went to investigate this a little bit more and found a few things. One, low alcohol and no alcohol beer have actually been around for a long time. They have evidence that low alcohol beer was brewed as far back as in ancient Egypt. They were brewing regular ales and beers as well, but also there were some that were much lower alcohol. And then NA beer was also brewed in medieval Europe by monks who were not allowed to partake in alcohol and would therefore brew beers and remove the alcohol, and then that would allow them to drink it.
Interesting.
Yes. But in terms of the United States and the non-alcoholic beer movement, you know, you brought up the temperance movement and prohibition. So obviously that was big for NA beer as well. So temperance was basically the movement that was trying to encourage a healthier lifestyle, but also like kind of just discouraging people from drinking alcohol in general. And like you said, it kind of was the precursor to prohibition. So when Prohibition hit and the temperance movement was in full swing, breweries like Anheuser-Busch and Pabst created what they called near beer, which was basically beer with less than 0.5% alcohol by volume. And they basically brewed their regular beer and then boiled the alcohol off and collected it when it condensated. So then actually, funny enough, during Prohibition, they would save that alcohol that they boiled off and create these little hidden packages and sell that like on the down low with the near beer so that people could then add the alcohol back in. So the near beer was kind of one of their ways of still selling product, but then they were also like, and here's the alcohol we took out of it so you can put it back in. So that was kind of like the first examples of widely available non-alcoholic beer. And that was really more out of necessity because of Prohibition. It also made me wonder, how do you create NA beer? Because I've been curious about this since I started drinking it. So I did a little research on that. And there's 4 major methods for creating non-alcoholic beer. You still use the 4 main ingredients: water, yeast, hops, and some kind of grain. And so same ingredients as regular beer, but they do one of these 4 methods. First one being controlled fermentation. That's basically when you create the beer, but you stop the fermentation process before it reaches the alcohol producing stage. So you basically just monitor and control at what point you stop fermentation. De-alcoholization is kind of what I was just talking about. You boil it and then it releases the alcohol as a vapor into a condenser, and then you collect it and send it away. Or during Prohibition, you sell it on the down low.
Yeah, right.
And you can also do dilution, which I'm not sure that this would taste so great, but dilution is basically just you take a small concentrated alcoholized beverage and add water to it. And then the 4th one is a simulated fermentation. In that process, they skip fermentation during the brewing process, and then they add different ingredients and enzymes that simulate fermentation but don't produce alcohol.
So it makes it like fizzy, essentially.
Yes.
Without the yeast.
Right.
Huh.
Those are the ways you create. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about NA beer. And also I learned that NA beer on the market today is anything that's 0.5% ABV or less. So there are some NA beers that technically still have a very small portion of alcohol. So if you're interested in NA beers, or if you're not drinking like me and you really want to abstain from any kind of alcohol at all, then you need to check the label to see if it's a 0.0 or if it's a 0.5 or less.
Right. I mean, that's like technically like things like bitters and stuff have alcohol in them.
Yes. It's like a tiny amount.
Yeah.
But yeah, just something to be aware of. Like, it can still be marketed as NA beer, even if it has 0.5% alcohol in it. So then I was also surprised to find out that as far as like commercially available non-alcoholic beers, other than the Prohibition out of necessity stuff, started in the 1970s, both in Germany. A brewery called Klaus Taylor, which I've had their beers and they're delicious for a non-alcoholic option. They started marketing and distributing their non-alcoholic beer in 1979. They grew really rapidly, and by 1984 were in 50 different countries. In the US during the 70s, a guy named Manny Zelzer lived in Texas, and he was working in the oil industry and was traveling back and forth to the Middle East a lot. And some of his Middle Eastern business contacts really liked the taste of American beer and would often ask him to bring American beers to them. But in the Middle East, in many countries, beer is, or alcohol in general is not legal. And so he basically started taking American beers, boiling off the alcohol, and then repackaged it and would bring it over to them so that they could kind of have an American beer, but not be breaking the law. And then he created a beer called Texan Select that was a non-alcoholic beer that he sold.
Man, but these people were enjoying the beer from the US in the 1970s.
Apparently. I mean, they, alcohol was illegal, so maybe they don't have a lot to compare to.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, in my mind, it's just something that's foreign and interesting.
Sure.
I bet.
Sure.
But that's what it said. Another milestone in the NA industry was in 1990, O'Doul's was put on the market. So that's like one of the most well-known non-alcoholic beers. It's not that great, but it's fine. That was often the NA option.
Well, I feel like early NA beers, all they were really comparing themselves to was Budweiser, right?
Yes,
so
correct.
It's not like they're trying to make something great when all of the beer that existed in the US was basically the same light beer, because craft beer doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah. Bud, Miller, all of those kind of things.
Right.
Yeah. Basically just an alcohol-free version of those basic domestics that were available at that time. But then in the late 2010s into the 2020s, along with that craft beer surge that you mentioned, the non-alcoholic beer popularity has really grown. And I think it's grown with the craft beer trend. And so microbrewers and other craft breweries started adding NA options. And then there were also the creation of exclusively NA breweries. The most notable and the largest of which in the US is Athletic.
Yeah. I've definitely had Athletic beers before.
And I think they really did something different in the market by bringing multiple styles of beers with a craft beer taste, but without alcohol.
Yeah, they have a ton of different options, Athletic, I feel like.
Yes, they do. And they were founded in 2017. So again, right in that peak. Like I think you said 2015 was around the time the craft breweries peaked. So they were founded in 2017 and they created the first brewing facility that was dedicated to non-alcoholic beer. And they are located in Connecticut.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they started out just in New England. They started selling in about 7 stores on a trial basis. So they opened that brewing facility in 2017, and then their sales grew from 2.5 million in 2019 to about 15 million in 2020.
Oh, wow. Like 3 years.
That's a 500% increase in 3 years.
That's crazy.
That they saw. And they have achieved sales of nearly 37 million from over 100,000 barrels of beer in 2021. So yeah, Athletic's probably the biggest example of any beers in the US. But in general, I was reading about sales of just non-alcoholic beverages. So that would include beer, non-alcoholic wines, non-alcoholic cocktails, all of that kind of stuff. Those sales reached 510 million at the end of 2023, which was up 121 million from 2022. So pretty dramatic increase within 1 year. And they're attributing that to non-alcoholic options being especially popular with Gen Z, that they're drinking less. They also said, though, that millennials are also starting to consume more non-alcoholic options. And in general, non-alcoholic beer sales in particular have been on an upward trend since 2018, mostly in the US, Japan, and Germany. Between 2019 and 2024, the NA beer volume in the United States increased by 175%.
Wow.
Yeah, the production of non-alcoholic beer and the sale of non-alcoholic beer has increased dramatically. Again, they're attributing some of that to younger generations not being as interested in drinking. I think also people have cited wellness or just health consciousness in general. I thought it was interesting that during the same time in 2023, the World Health Organization published the statement that really no amount of alcohol is considered safe to consume. Like if you're consuming alcohol, your chances of cancer or cardiovascular disease or other health conditions increase, and alcohol is right in there with the same risk category as tobacco and asbestos, just health-wise. And I think there's some greater health consciousness in the market now, and I don't know, and maybe younger generations are more concerned about that too. So I think that's contributed to the increase in options when it comes to the non-alcoholic beers. But I mean, also interesting that it really has trended upward with the craft market in general. And I didn't realize that it had been around kind of as long as the craft industry has been around, or as long as that's been popular, but it's just really taken off in terms of availability and variety. Over the last few years.
Yeah, I know by my house this January, there was like an NA, you know how like you can go to like a beer festival or whatever and like try all different beers? There was like an NA drink festival that happened by my house this past January where it was like all these vendors and you could go and like try all the NA options and stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. So like I had no idea that there were so many. And like I said, it was like lucky for me, this year's the year I decided to stop consuming alcohol, and like all of these options are now available and also trending. So I noticed too, even in the last year, the Total Wine that's down the road from us, they went from having a fairly small non-alcoholic drink section, and then they moved it to a different area of the store, and it's probably 3 times as much shelf space now that the non-alcoholic options take up.
It is funny to me if you think about, I think a lot of people think of NA beer and they still think of like O'Doul's or like St. Pauli's Girl or whatever the heck. But I feel like that was just a product of what beer was when those things were invented, because craft beer in general is so new, right? Prior to 1990, we aren't even drinking craft beers, really.
Yeah.
So,
yep, I hadn't thought about that either. Like that coincides with the fact that craft beer in general is very recent. So,
and then obviously, you need a market, I think, for craft beer before you can have a market, I think, for NA craft beer, right?
Exactly.
So it's like once that happens, then we can start shifting to create this like NA market too, which is, it is just interesting, the 2 and 2 growing together, but also just this very rapid explosion, I think, is fascinating.
Yep, I do too. Like I said, I've taken a lot more notice this last year since I have been a consumer of the NA beverages, but I've been impressed with a lot of them that I've tried. I've had a really good NA sour. I've had very good NA IPAs, but also I've been surprised to find things like Stella Artois has a 0% that to me tastes just like a Stella. Coronas, I've been doing Corona zeros. Guinness has a 0. So a lot of the big name beers are creating NA versions as well, and they taste pretty darn similar to me, and they kind of satisfy that desire for, I love the taste of a beer, especially like a cold beer in the summer or a beer with pizza or wings or something like that. And I don't really miss the alcohol because I think the flavor's there.
Interesting.
So I'm very interested to see too where that industry goes, because, with you saying craft breweries have hit a little bit of a wall in terms of growth, but it makes me wonder if some of them will pivot to start offering more NA options, because it seems like the market is demanding it. And if they do, maybe they see more growth in that area.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, because it also just makes me wonder, like, is there enough overlap that's happening between craft beer drinkers and NA craft beer drinkers that it's all theoretically the same market segment, right? Like, I know obviously like there are some people that aren't drinking alcohol and some people that are, but are those still the craft drinkers? And if that's just that segment of the population total, you know what I mean? Like, are we really picking up people that aren't drinking any beer at all?
Yeah, that they were never interested in beer to begin with.
Exactly. The not beer people, period, right? The not craft people, period. It is crazy to think about like how much beer is being consumed, period, and craft and NA are still such a small chunk of it.
Right, in comparison.
Yeah. I don't know. I do know that when I was in Prague last month, we were chatting. We were at a brewery in Prague, and we were chatting with a guy that we met at the bar who was from Germany, and he was going on and on about how, even though he's from Germany and they consider themselves to be the best beer makers, how today he feels like the US makes some of the best beer because of the experimentation and like flavors and IPAs especially and things like this that the US is quote unquote allowed to do, whereas you're not necessarily allowed theoretically to experiment in that way in what's considered beer and stuff in Germany.
Yeah, because they have very strict standards.
Yeah,
right.
Which we're not going to get into standards obviously in this podcast episode, but it is interesting to think about that this growth of craft beer in the US is not only new to the US but also kind of unique in that situation where the US is really producing something new and different right now. And I think NA craft beer probably falls into that category as well. So
if there are any other listeners out there who are beer enthusiasts, craft beer enthusiasts, we would love to hear what your favorite local breweries are.
Yeah.
Or what kind of beer you like to drink.
I do think that craft breweries are community spaces that, try to be pretty welcoming. And, I'm not surprised to see that they're expanding into different options like seltzers or NA beers just to be more welcoming in general.
Yeah. Even though I have not been drinking alcohol, I still love going and hanging out at a brewery. That is definitely one of my favorite things to do. And I've been pleasantly surprised by the options that most breweries will have a couple of options, even if you're not, drinking alcohol. I love breweries, so I hope that this slowdown in growth is not necessarily an indication that they're on their way out, but maybe just changing a little bit. And also the best ones are the ones surviving.
Yeah. But go support your local craft brewery and
share your favorite craft brews with us.
Thank you for listening to Researching the Obvious. To learn more fun facts about everything that we're researching, follow us on Instagram at Researching the Obvious Pod, all one word. You can also follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you know someone that you think would enjoy listening to all of our findings, please feel free to share or give us a review. Researching the Obvious is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Emily Fekete and Katie Nakanishi. Tune in next time to hear more obvious facts.